Apple, you know. So, and it's the same on Facebook, and they create it for free. Now, in doing so, they've allowed the people to be part of the brand and to be brand advocates. Now, the challenge for us is how do we adopt that business model and say, let's use it for our industry? How can we, get the consumers to create communication with us?
At the moment, it's not a model. A couple of companies do it really well, but they do it attached to products. To me, it's interesting is the whole social networking, and almost everybody is experimenting with social networking and participating. First of all, I don't think in those spaces you have a first mover advantage. I remember 10 years ago trying to tell clients you had to have a website, because otherwise you would be irrelevant. You didn't have to have a website in 95. As long as you did it correctly, 5 years later, you were okay. And also the social media is like, it's a personal place for people to live with their friends. A company is not invited there. We can find a reasonable way in, but it's going to be very hard to be invited.
But I think that's the point. I think it's a bit like the issue you're facing, is that if these places that people like to gather are invaded by companies in an uninvited fashion,
absolutely,
the whole thing falls apart. It's like great marketing.
Unless you provide value and you make them come to you. That's what Apple did. That's what, one of the greatest examples to me of the brand and social network is Nike Plus. But they created a social networking place where people that share that passion can engage. They didn't sort of like invade all the MySpaces and the Facebooks and sort of like almost uninvited try to sort of like, I'll give you $5 off the next purchase. And that's where, but we're not hardwired to think that way. And nobody has kind of like invented a model that you can just mass customize and run.
Well, it's the shift from a monologue to a dialogue. And that's what those, like Nike Plus does, which is, it creates a dialogue. So I could be competing against Richard, even though he's in Paris, and we'll still be running and go,
Pravin, you're normally the monologue guy. Ben, you wanted to say something, I think.
Yeah, I think what Francesco said is really interesting about how the domain of social networks is a private thing, even though it's for the masses, right? It's generally, if a company were just to barge in and start a conversation, it's not going to work. People are going to get suspicious, they're going to say, are you trying to sell me something? But if, for example, like you brought up the Apple App Store as well as Nike, what these companies did and why they were successful, I find, is that they didn't actually barge into a conversation. They started their own conversation outside of the group, so to speak. So if you picture a bunch of people just talking about their own thing, and another interesting conversation happens just like within earshot. And then you get a few people who are going, hey, what's going on over there? And someone will begin to start their own conversation. That's how you learn and be part of the great group. And I think that's, if anything, if anybody were to ask me what social network strategy is, I would say start a conversation, find a conversation, find something that you think people will be interested in, but don't say this is what you'll be interested in. Just say, we're going to start talking about this first. If you want, you can do it.
But if you look at the amount of marketing spend on digital media, whatever form, in Asia, it underperforms the global average at the moment. For Asia is spending less or less committed to digital media than other parts of the world. Why do you think that is?
Because of the perceived constraints. We were discussing this the other time. In Asia, I think, as opposed to your Western liberal democracies, you have a large amount of control by governments and establishments as to how people conduct discourse with each other. So you were just talking about a phenomenon like Facebook is supposed to be one of the largest, eighth largest nation in the world in terms of population. But in China, Facebook hasn't exactly taken on because there's the need to remain anonymous. But you start off saying that okay, this application called Facebook and all the Chinese citizens are saying, oh, my face up on the internet, nobody can see. So people are going to, I can imagine the people in that sphere are going to say, okay, I'm not going to put that much money in advertising online, on Facebook for instance, because it's not going to reach out to people who have to find another way. and not necessarily spending the same amount of media buying and all that. So I think at the moment, I think it's also a bit of a flux. I'm not sure how to
how are you saying that?
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, there's two things. One is there's a belief, which I think has some kind of foundation, that because of the way the society is organized, and there's still some space for the original media to play a bigger role than in some of the Western societies. And the other thing is because it goes back to the fact that we still very much use broadly new media as old media, advertisers, and so we do web banners and we do microsites, and we try and push them on people and give them, click on this bar and get $10 off or incentive, and then go into a microsite, and we think it's the greatest thing. But most people in Asia browse on their cell phone, much more than in the Western world. In the US, you have your computer on almost all day, so your ability to get something of that on your cell phone, we don't know yet how, when I see those banners on the cell phone, they just annoy me because they pop up on the screen. I can't even read what it says. And that's why I think there's, it's probably, when we go and look at the ability to engage, it's probably even lower. But that's because, it's the most engaging medium, we just don't know how to use it.
I think political structures in Asia will change. So if you track what's happening, 5 years ago, the Philippines overthrew a government by SMS. If you look at what's happening in Malaysia now, people are receiving alternative news sources from Malaysia CME. If you look at Indonesia, you look at Singapore, those structures will change. And when those structures change, the change will come very quickly. And the younger children of, let's say, Singapore, which traditionally is quite controlled, are not used to that. And you move to a freer system. But in China,
if digital has not been as embraced in Asia as in other parts of the world, one thing I think that is very true of virtually every company is that Asia is now much a larger part of their business than ever before. If you look at the 90s, globalization was almost described as Americanization. That would be probably the best way of describing it, or the Americanization of the culture. It has been put to me that 10 years on, we haven't really seen the equal and opposite reaction. If the balance of power is genuinely shifting to Asia, why hasn't it been more Asianization? Why has it effectively been global and often Western brands making huge inroads in Asia? Do you think we're going to see a huge change in that?
I'd argue that it's additive. So, Americanization was an extension of Europeanization. And I think, the world is becoming, this sounds like a cliche, but it's more global. And, even in Europe, 15, 20 years ago, when there was the beginning of the birth of the EU, it was like we were losing our sort of national identity because Europe was becoming a place where brands were circulating, and people were circulating, and there's a fear of the French people are losing language altogether. So I just think that as the world becomes smaller, it just becomes additive as opposed to one culture kind of taking over.
I think it's also the market potential. If you look at India now, there's a little bit of a reverse colonization going on. You have cricket, and cricket wouldn't exist if not for the Indians. And India's gone on to buying English companies, BT, Jaguar, Land Rover. And if you look at China, hires a factory in South Carolina. Why? Can they do it cheaper in Mexico? Yes. But why do they have it in South Carolina? Because they can. And I think that with India and China, until the domestic companies have maximized that scale and that size, once they do that, then
but Gavin, it took decades for the Japanese since the 70s and the Koreans since the 80s to have their brands, the brand Korea, brand Japan, not be negative. In fact, in certain instances now be additive to the brand values. Brand India and brand China have still some way to go. Friends of mine who have Range Rovers, it was bad enough when I told them they were driving a Ford. Now I'm telling them they're driving a Tata. It doesn't go down so well. So do you think we're going to, how long do you think it's going to take brand India and brand China to really be additive to the products that come behind those brands?
I think less brand India, I think more brand China. Having melamine in your baby's milk, not a good thing.
Yeah.
Lead in your Barbie doll, not a good thing. So they've got to get over that and build a consistent kind of standard, especially when they're producers to the world. Once they sort that out, and once they realize the importance of that, I think
On the other hand, it took one movie for Bollywood to go from cheesy to cool.
Yeah. Well, the one with Snoop
Very
Dogg.
true, very true. Ben, where are you on this?
Taking a lot of how Japan actually has been placed in the world. It's more of a very quick evolution rather than a revolution, as Calvin likes to push out. My favorite example would be how you had the Romanization of the part of Rome, and we kept the Roman alphabet, so it's not going to be like a reaction to an Americanization, but an appropriation of the things that the world thinks is good for that economy, and stick to it and build on it. So I think that's the shift is going to be more like that. So you could see a more what the older generation would perceive as a more Americanized China, but actually that's the shift.
That's a very powerful image you're painting there, in terms of what you think will come about. So your view almost is that there was a greater acceptance of the Tata Land Rover than there would have been 10, 20 years ago. Do you think the digital world, which is the other part of the shift of power, is going to help that, so that people can share information so much quicker, and therefore the knowledge behind these companies is so much more open and obvious, so people are no longer as fearful of them and not knowing who they are?
Correct. By bringing people in, more people within earshot of the organization, that's how I like to put it as well. Whereas, say, 10, 15 years ago, if there was something wrong with some company, not everybody would be aware of it. And basically how these companies will actually get feedback is a lot slower than what it is now.
Yeah. So you think that in France there's been this very strong push for the last 20, 30 years to have national champions in various sectors, almost protectionism, but obviously everyone would deny it was worded that way. Do you think that we're going to see some of that in China and India, or do you think that the opening of the borders in the sense of we'll let people in as much as we want to go outside? What are we going to see here? Do we see a lot more acquisitions in both directions, or is it just one direction for these acquisitions of brands? I mean, you Citibank, you have bought up lots of different banks over the world to make a big global corporation.
I mean, China has taken the shortcut of buying brands with local countries. Because, I mean, China owns a vast percentage of the American debt. So, I think that those balances are becoming more complex. And I think to a certain extent there's going to be an acceptance of Western brands, and then some of these brands are going to start taking part of the conversation, and then go to the West. I mean, Japan has gone from copycatting Western brands to actually producing cool brands, as they kind of understood that dialogue.
There was the Chinese sovereign wealth fund guy who's heading up the largest one, and he went to Europe recently, and he thanked the Europeans. He said, 2 years ago I tried to come by and buy some of your companies. You set so many restrictions, and you set prices so high, I can't buy them. Now you've come back and asked me, please buy them, no restrictions, and the price is gone. So I'd like to thank you, Europeans, for saving me a lot of money.
Power of creativity. A lot of as markets get more homogeneous, the sense of the need for communications to stand out and be different from the way the message is communicated, rather than just the simple statement of facts about products. We've seen a lot of this happen. How do you see the way creativity is going to be affected by the shift in power from west to east, from producers to consumers, and from old media to new media? What are we going to see, do you think, over the next few years? Is it mobile? Is that the place we're going to see the most interesting creative places? What do we think is the shape of that?
I think this will be really interesting because traditionally it was limited by how much money you had, what kind of media can your money buy. It's like if I was a very big company and millions of dollars, I can just buy a whole newspaper full of ads. But nobody's going to actually look at it and say, okay, I know the brand already, you have a lot of money, you can spend on it, but I'm not interested in your product. Sure, I'm aware of it, I'm not going to buy it. But one of the examples I brought up with them, we thought it was really interesting, was in China, like I was saying, that people are usually very anonymous about it, and you don't know what actually tickles their fancy until you actually listen to the conversation. And sometimes there are some things that are uttered on the forums and on the social network users that just totally baffles you. Why did it take off like wildfire? We don't know. But let's just follow it anyway. I'm talking about a couple of months ago, there was we don't know who it was, who the author, that somebody actually wrote in Chinese, a very generic Chinese name. I think it was Ma Jun, please, your mother asked you to come home for dinner. And people started copying this and pasting it and started repeating it all throughout the forums and all throughout. I think something like that. It must have been one of those people that copied and pasted it.
Sounds like something out of a John le Carre novel.
Yeah,
it's a secret message.
Cryptic message, nobody knows where it came from. And this car dealership actually did what I thought was the right thing and put out an ad. I think it was an online ad that said, Martin, your mother wants you to come here and buy a car this weekend. So I thought that's an inkling of where we should go. It's not necessarily about money, but how we actually listen and be part of the conversation.
I think the future is who starts, who leads, and who manages the conversation. And then the media channels will apply. I mean, if you look at, and the best way to look at it is probably religions. If you look at, let's pick Christianity. Before printing, there was just people spreading the word around, and the story of the religion. Then printing came about, then radio, then TV, then the internet. And people are still creating and co-creating the religion. I've gone to this place, I've seen this, I've drunk the water, I'm cured. So it's still lives on. And the mediums would just facilitate. And as new mediums come about, the new mediums will facilitate the story.
But this creates a lot of challenge for clients because agencies love brand, they call themselves brand guardians, but clients even more so use titles like brand manager. Do you think that's appropriate anymore?
I actually think, one of the reasons why I moved from agency to client is because the clients need to take back the brand guardianship. And I think the agencies need to become champion of ideas and have their own brand. And the challenge for me is going to be that we have been trained to think sort of like 3 months is a short time. And everything needs to be, on our side it needs to be approved all the way up to God, and then on the agency side we need to sort of like, you have your own goals and production lines and sort of like, thinking about quality of production and that kind of stuff. Whereas we need to think much more opportunistically about lots of ideas that are true. We need to own the brand because it needs to be true to who we are and who we want to be. But then we have to have lots of ideas in terms of that thing participating in the conversation.
But it's a very true point now. I remember sitting with one of our clients in Europe and explaining to them that of all the films that were on YouTube with their brand name, when you tap their brand name in the search engine, their board of their company had only approved 3% of them. So in other words, only 3% of the ads on YouTube for that brand were made by that company, and the entire of the company, which puts a lot of pressure on the system to be able to deliver, because what you're really saying is we've moved from ready, aim, fire to ready, fire, aim. And that means people have to be very comfortable with the actions of the brand manager and the agency, because otherwise you can have guys in New York yelling, what on earth is Calvin after he's off on one again? Yeah? How do we think we manage that?
And then throw in their legal compliance.
Exactly.
Although, it's interesting because it's like we've been experimenting on and thinking about experimenting. Actually, Twitter, for example, throughout this banking crisis, Twitter was taking off in the States. Everybody's all about Twitter, and you think, you have to participate in Twitter conversation. The only way in which you participate in Twitter conversation is by being honest and saying, whatever flippant comment comes to mind, or something that people want to know. So they would have loved to hear from Vikram, our CEO, after he had to go and sort of humble himself with another 9 CEOs in front of the Senate. Now, that 5 words would have had to go through a whole host of high-powered lawyers, and with anything the bank would say in terms of public forum. So even if we didn't have a Twitter channel, it would have been so bland, so sort of like vetted, that we wouldn't have had the the nature of engagement.
But he doesn't have to do that. He just writes what he thinks.
Exactly, but I can't participate as Citibank in that conversation. So we have to let him sort of like say what he thought of that TV show.
Just like companies have to engage in consumers, make the consumers pass their message on. It's a bit like how Apple used to call the people that help them with the marketing, used to call them evangelists. Do they still do that? I don't think so. But, yeah, that's a pretty good term. You want to convert people to your cause and send them out to spread the message. It shouldn't come from you yourself.
But Calvin, if you're looking at the power of creativity as the point I was making, what do you therefore see as the limitations of this? Because you've got clients asking for lots and lots of pieces, lots of material, done quickly, done cheaper, because they need lots more for the same money. This is going to change quite a lot of the way we, as a business, go about producing work.
Yeah. The problem with other industries, we've not evolved. The 3 car companies have gone bankrupt. We still have the art director and copywriter working. Whereas the opportunity now is to follow the Apple model and figure out a process and a way where you can harness how the consumers out there of the greater good to create some of the communications and some of the ideas quite quickly. And these are some of the things that we're doing. And instead of looking at a focus group as a way to, as a mirror to say yes or no to the product that we created, an idea that we created, is there a way to harness the focus group to come up with some of the stories and some of the ideas?
What is your view that if the consumers come up with them and the lawyers and everyone else can't argue? Is that the angle of it? How does that fly?
Our only thing is, Calvin was talking, there's a couple of powers that are going on between the client and agency in terms of shift of balance. When I started in the agency business, a good agency was the agency that knew their client's business very well. I think a good agency now is an agency that knows their business very well. I want to speak to an agency that really understands communication, customer marketing. I don't need them to know banking, because I know banking. The other power that is shifting is the fact that they used to be a very respectful, that's your boundary, that's my boundary. Now there needs to be a much open dialogue. I know my brand, you know your business. We need to come up with content. So to a certain extent, if consumers come up with content, great. But we can't influence them, we can't push that, but we need to sort of like generate a conversation that people can participate to, and that will just come from the participation. It can't come anymore from here's the brief.
No.
Come back in 3 weeks and I'll take it to my management to get your proof.
There's no reason why this couldn't be a creative team, so to speak.
Yep. Well, I think one of the things I learned going back to Europe 5 years ago from spending 4 years here in Asia was the sheer speed, even back then, of how things were done. And I was staggered at how slow Europe was at developing things. I think that has changed quite a lot, but I still think Asia's ahead. So maybe that's an area that Asia can help push in the industry as well, because otherwise the digital piece goes the other way, where we're behind here.
Yeah. That's now, it goes back to the first 3 questions. The shift of power from east to west isn't so much a revolution, that's where Asia is going to set some of the Asian trends. The rest of the world is going to have to start moving at Asian speed, because all the money is moving here.
What's the potential from the banking industry in terms of?
Well, I know we were discussing the other day, and I was saying one of the reasons I'm here is because the money, the focus, all the activity is moving here. I joined Citibank 5 years ago. 60% of the business, 5 years ago, 60% of the business was US, 40% of the business was ROW, rest of the world. Today, 35% of Citibank business is in the US, 26% is in Asia, 50% of the business is in emerging markets. And those markets move at a different speed, are starting from a different starting point. So they don't have legacy they have to pay tribute to. They can start experimenting in new media, in new types of conversations, in new relationships with sort of like creative partners, etc. And that's the speed the rest of the world will have to adapt, because otherwise the European brands and the US brands will fall behind.
No, okay, fair. We've only got a minute or so left. Do you want to just give any final summary, having had all these conversations here?
Yeah, I think I can sum up by giving an example of what I went through in the last 4 years. As you know, in Singapore, national service is compulsory. So I was part of a combat unit for the last 20 years. My unit's just been stood down. In 2005, I was sent to Australia for training, and together with all the rest of my units, And I took a camera along and started taking pictures, and on my phone as well. And it was the only way I could keep in touch with my family by sending MMS back to Singapore, and my business partner then actually put it up on my blog, just to let my blog readers know that, okay, Ben's doing quite well in Australia. This is a picture of him on his motorcycle and making all money and all that. The newspaper got wind of it, Strange Times, and decided that to run a story that's really interesting. Reservist soldiers going abroad, and this is how to keep in touch with their loved ones. The Ministry of Defense, however, didn't know that this was going on. They didn't know what they get pictures back from Australia. We're not even supposed to know they're in Australia.
We have Google Maps.
So, when I came back from Australia, I was locked up in Selarang Barracks for a whole day and interrogated. Selarang Barracks, if you don't know, is where they kept the British and Australian POWs in the Second World War. So it's a bit of a daunting place. So it was in an air-conditioned room when they had an aircon in the World War. But what happened was that they said, okay, we're going to charge you with large number of
Official breaches.
official standards act and all that. And I took a punt. I said, these pictures are already out there. I can bet you, I was being a bit of an asshole as well, that by tomorrow or the day after, this is going to appear in the regional newspapers and keep me under investigation. They balked, they panicked, and they said, okay, we're going to refer this to the British General. Made several phone calls. I said there's nothing I can stop the media outlet from actually publicizing this, so you've got to do something. This is when they realized, okay, there's something useful in this guy, all our army ads, all our PR work about how good the army is, how we're protecting the nation and all that, has never actually dented the public consciousness. But suddenly this one little soldier,
Our stories.
who goes overseas and publishes a couple of photographs, and he's all over the Sydney Morning Herald, South China Morning Post. So they decided, okay, let's allow this guy to post up his pictures and say that, yeah, we like to engage the public, and this is how we show that our soldiers are participating in the defense of the country. They were just slightly pissed off because the day the news story broke in the Sydney Morning Herald was the day they actually had a press release about the new mission. Totally overshadowed it.
The balance of power truly shifting. Thank you very much.